great to see you all. Since we last met, I finally changed my shirt, let my wife cut my hair, and I'm still here, hanging in there, as I'm sure all of you are. But if you can give us a quick hello in the chat, if you can hear me, see me okay, and let us know where you're tuning in from and how you're doing. How are you? I guess another thing that's happened since we last talked is the Chris's keep multiplying. We are here to talk about those disengaged students. We have heard from you that this is a big concern that is just weighing against everything else that's going on. And we've invited Chris Williams from NYIT to come join us and talk to us about some of the ways we could solution and workshop together to support those students. So I'd like to start with that, and maybe I can have the three Chris's here and introduce themselves and maybe frame today's session a little bit more. What is the problem that we are actually trying to address here? Chris Williams, maybe we can start with you. Great to have you here, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Williams. I work at NYIT, where I work with underserved students in STEM with the New York State STEP program. I'm thankful for Dennis and the Chris's for inviting me today. I work with students who do not have digital access to a lot of the content that we're streaming. So a lot of the times it's how do we engage those students, and what are some of the strategies that we're using in order to do that, and what are the out of the box type of things that we're doing in order to make sure that we reach them. And I think I'm very thankful that we're having this conversation today, and I hope to also hear, not only say some things, but also hear from you guys as to what things that you might have as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's great to have you here. Maybe we can launch a poll to hear from folks of where they're, what level they're teaching. We've done this at the start of every webinar, and then Chris Smyrner, maybe you can take it away, and also just a quick reminder: if you are chatting, we are throwing this in the chat as well. Make sure you change your chat to field to panelists and attendees, so everyone can join in and be engaged by whatever you have to share.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to be back in this forum again. It's been sort of the highlight of the last month or so, is to meet with you guys and hear your stories and hear how you're loving on your students in this sort of new world order. I'm Chris Murner. I'm the Director of Instructional Design here at Kaplan. I've taught high school chemistry, physics, and algebra in the rear view, and just love really hearing from you guys. I think, to me, so many educators left school on their last day and didn't know it was the last day, right? And didn't get a goodbye, didn't get to set expectations on what the next few weeks would look like. And we've all been kind of playing catch up ever since. And so I really can't wait to hear some of these ideas and ways that you guys have been reaching out to your students. I know in the past few meetings that we've had, different people have surfaced ideas and just the concerns around those students that may or may not have been struggling before this all happened, but now find yourselves in a situation where you're not able to reach all of the students that you could get eyes on before and kind of get a feel for how they're doing. So really excited to lean in, and it's nice to see where everybody's from. It's always so cool to see such a wide audience, which is so great.
And I'm Chris Ryan. Good to see many of you again, and those who are new, welcome. And my background is I taught kind of similar to Chris Murner, physics and chemistry once upon a time in a couple of different high schools, and now work in product strategy and development at Kaplan. And I echo what you just said, Chris, of these sessions have been a highlight and an anchor for me too. And thank you all for sharing your struggles and challenges, and also your ideas about ways forward, because we are certainly not the experts. We are just trying to provide a forum and share ideas and a place where we can all try to solution some things going forward. The way I've been thinking about this issue is, in a time when educators are overwhelmed by all the challenges and the agendas, how can we kind of release the agenda so that we can start almost from scratch at this point and say, how can we reach those kids who need us, those students who need us the most, starting from almost like forget the preconceptions. So releasing the assumptions, releasing the agenda, rather than working from an old state, what can be the sort of blank slate almost that we can start from for that.
I love that, Chris. Thank you. And I just want to give a shout out to Ellen in the chat, who is typed in. Ellen, please, I would love to type this to all panelist attendees. She wrote to just panelists, but she wrote, I'm hoping to hear some thoughts on how to support and engage students who feel lost or lack self-direction and are therefore distracted from coursework. And I think that's actually, everything you've said is awesome, but this idea that every student's going to be impacted by this one way or another. I mean, I think that's the reality, and the amount of support that these students need is going to vary from student to student, and and really from program to program, and really depending on kind of the access that folks have, which is again why we brought Chris Williams here to join us. We want to learn more. We want to hear more. Chris Murray, I know you wanted to ask another poll question just to get us kicked off so we can have that. Would you just frame that a little bit for the folks here?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of coverage in the media about students who have disengaged for a variety of reasons, right? Some of it is the technical divide between have and have not in terms of access. Sometimes it's just the support system at home. There's, they cover a variety of angles, but a lot of them haven't been particularly solution oriented, which is why we're here. But to kind of set that up, I'd really be curious to know from you, what percentage of your students have engaged at the level you are requiring? So in terms of, you've set up your online classroom to the best of your ability, you've held your Zoom sessions, you've reached out to them with packets, however you've engaged your students over the last month or so, what have you seen in terms of engagement? And as a follow-up, after you answer this, I'd love for you to stick it in the chat as to how that compares with your regular engagement, right? If 80% of your students are doing what they're supposed to be doing now, is that usually what you see, or is there a big discrepancy? Because I think, numbers don't often tell the full story. It'd be just interesting to know, I think, for us as we frame this conversation, how you're struggling individually and what you're seeing and how it compares to the normal course of business in the classroom.
And I see the chat popping off, which is great. Please, this is about you, right? We just want to be here to support and to have an open discussion around some ways we could solution together. We brought some practical ideas that we'd like to discuss, but also, as always, you all have been so supportive of each other. So any solutions, any reactions you have, keep the chat going, and I'll make sure to tie them in as much as we can. So on that note, Chris Williams, back to you, sir. I keep calling you sir. I don't know why. You just have this aura of like you're the guru here, right? Like what are some things that you've seen these past few weeks? What are some of these things that talk to us a little bit more? Maybe there's a short story you could share here, or
Sure. A little bit of my background also. I was a high school living environment, earth science, chemistry, and research teacher for about 15 years. So when I approach it, I always approach it as, how does it work for you? And when we started switching from this face-to-face to the online environment, I noticed that the level of thinking that I was using when I was in the classroom had to change. The strategies that I used had to change. And I reminded not only myself, but my students on the first day of the Albert Einstein quote, the significant problems we face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. And I invited my students to not only talk to me, but also critique me and each other about what it is that they need. And one of my students, she shared something after about week 2. She was like, Mr. Williams, it gets boring after a while, seeing the same things, having all of the screens turned off. What is it that I can, how can I keep myself engaged when, I am worried about everything else that's going on? So we shifted a little bit, and I said, instead of talking about living environment and instead of talking about science, we're going to take it into a practical situation. And I went right into my kitchen and we started doing baking bread, talking about yeast, talking about, the science behind bread and cooking. And it was a ninth and 10th grade living environment class. And everybody in the chat and everybody was like, Mr. Williams, you know how to cook? I was like, yes, I do. So we just started thinking of different ways to engage students, not only on the academic level, but on the practical level. How do I use this? Why? Why is this important? Not only in class, but why is it important to me? And that was where I started getting students to come back to what we were like when we were in a class, engaging each other. And I have to admit, I had a couple of comments. They're like, Mr. Williams, I like your kitchen. I'm like, guys, focus. So, we had just those types of moments made it important for not only myself, but my students. And I have to say, after that lesson, a lot more students started opening up their cameras and showing everything that that was going on behind them. So it went from a blank screen to everybody showing me, their room color changing, or, just things that were important to them. Flowers that they were growing, and, what their kitchen looked like. So it was just an interesting learning experience for me, just opening up and saying, we're all in this together, not just hearing that on TV, but actually experiencing it in class and saying, this is what I have. What do you have in order to bring to the table so that we can actually work on this together? And I found a lot more of the students who were completely disengaged started to becoming a little bit more engaged, and the students were texting each other outside of the chat saying, take a look at what Mr. Williams is doing today, just to see what I would do.
I love that. What I'm hearing, and I'm hearing in the chat as well, is in terms of engagement. And Chris Marie, I want to tap you in to talk a little bit about these numbers that we're sharing here. We're hearing some drop off in engagement after starting strong. And part of that could be the burnout, right? The overwhelming nature of having to deal with this on your screen over and over again. I'm seeing some suggestions of check in and check out time that is maybe even non-class related, some way to bring your life into it. If you can relate it to the science, even better. In the case of yeast, I love cooking, right? It's always a great connection. And then also just hearing from folks that this is, it's an opportunity to make things new, make things different, make things more creative. These are some of the things I'm hearing in the chat. Chris Ryan, you have some thoughts on that, right? Because academics can definitely be overwhelming. I mean, we've heard that word, and then we can come back to maybe some of these engagement numbers. Sure.
Sorry, I thought you were going to go to the poll.
Yep.
Repeat that part, because I think I
super
went
cool.
off the end of it.
Let's hit the poll.
Yeah.
I probably reversed that order. Shame on me. But
No.
start with the poll
It's
first.
live TV, y'all.
We're doing our best. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? It's pretty statistically significant that there's quite a range of engagement, right? I think, and watching the chat kind of roll through actually gives more context to these numbers. And I think, as they generally do. And I think, it's fascinating to kind of dig in where students have remained engaged. It looks like a lot of the time it's because you're checking in and you're doing a lot of the extra work as the educator, right? To try to get in their space and make that relationship persevere. But then I see other people who say, yeah, it started out really great and now it's tapered off somewhat. And there's kind of a fatigue of owning this. And at first it was like, we got this. And there's like an adrenaline rush of, oh my goodness, we have to pivot to online learning. And the kids were in it because they were excited if they were younger. And the adults were in it because they were in a panic and knew they had to pick up the new plate and spin it with all of the others. And as time goes on, there's a fatigue that sets in, right? And we see it in the news with the stay-at-home orders. People aren't as willing to stay home, or those things kind of get old as they become more stressors than new interesting things to manage. And so I think that relatability, that check-in, and then for adult learners, which there's a lot of college and post-grad folks here today, in nursing school and in med school, right, you have to explain to them the why of these activities. I think when students come on campus and it's an assignment and it feels very bounded to the classroom, there's a little bit more like, well, school's my job, and so I'm going to do it because they've assigned it. But adult learning theory will tell you day in and day out that if you explain to the student why and how this benefits them, and if you make it real to their life, like Chris Williams was saying, you've done something to not only help them retain it because they're going to attach it to a memory of something real and tangible, but also you've helped them make that trade-off of, all right, I'm not going to do this with my kid right now because if I do this assignment, it's going to help me do better next week, or it's going to help me do this, that, or the other thing. The why of the assignment is so critical for adult learning. And I think it's something that as educators, sometimes we struggle with, right? We know that, we're assigning this because it has to be learned in order to get to the next thing, which is the next thing. But students don't often see that scaffold. And as adult learners, if we help them kind of get a preview into that, it helps them buy in with us and helps them attend to it so that that intrinsic learning can be focused on as opposed to the extrinsic life things, which are just overwhelming, frankly, right now. So the better we can do to help frame it for them as to why it matters and how it relates to real life, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah,
Actually,
I think I was just going to say, I think we framed this question specifically for that reason, right? Have engaged at the level you're requiring. And maybe that's and you had the right order there, Chris and Ryan. Maybe I'd love for you to touch upon that a little bit more in terms of the overwhelming nature of what we could be asking for here.
Right. And Chris Williams, I want to hear from you on this issue of ways to bring it back to the real and the concrete and the meaningful. And just managing the overwhelm. I think we have to, in a previous session, we talked about plan on doing 80%, covering 80% is a totally rough number, what you're going to do. I'd almost rather say, start from 0 and build up. What is the 20% you're going to do, and have it be concentrated and meaningful? There was a good article that just came out a couple days ago in the New York Times about, it's actually the start of a podcast on this issue. We can put the link in the chat, where a teacher has in the past used Juneteenth with her students as a way of a kind of capstone project. And what she's now doing is really focusing on that and dropping away some of the extraneous stuff. And in fact, through that Juneteenth essay reading, you can invite more people and so forth. So it's kind of like get rid of the overwhelm, which comes from lots of littles. We've said this before, select a tool, select a single thing. I think this goes for curriculum even more now than ever before, as opposed to trying to hit every single learning objective on the learning objective list in every chapter. Jettison more, focus on one big meaningful thing. So, and Chris, I'd love to loop you in to talk about how do you make it meaningful? How can we make it meaningful for our students?
No, that's awesome. And you're right. One of the parts of NYIT that I work with is the technology-based learning systems. And our motto is encourage the heart, enable the mind. And when you bring that heart, which we as teachers, we have a lot of heart and we want to bring in and we want to engage all of our students. What are some of those ways that we do? We all have different teaching styles and we all have different ways we engage our students. The things that I use are, and I think that's what you were asking, right, Christian? I do a lot of connection with my parents. I understand that the parents are just as scared sometimes as the students, because now they're being thrust into a world where they have to remember a lot of content. And sometimes if they have students who are in multiple levels, how do you adjust and how do you help your child? Because parents or guardians do want to help. For the most part, they really do want to help. But how do you do that? So I would send out questions just to the parents with answers as to how they can help. This is how you show your third grader. I teach middle school and high school, but this is how you show your third grader how to add fractions. Full disclosure, I had to remember how to do that myself. I'm a scientist. So math was a little challenging, especially adding fractions, because I had to teach my children how to do it through cooking. But there are, how else can you make some of the content that you're doing relatable to them? We had a discussion the other day about an English assignment, and I had suggested this to my son's English teacher about uh, putting themselves into a story and making sure that the things that's happening now are expressed in that story. Constantly bringing all of the content back to them, because the students are going to relate to, if nothing else, they're going to relate to themselves. So how is it that I as a teacher or I as a content specialist can bring that back to them? And being creative and thinking of pushing your mind in those different ways in order to kind of address those things, that's where the fun is for me. Um, my middle school group and we talked about this yesterday. In order to do proofs, I had them take pictures of their room and say, prove that all of the rectangles in the room work. I'm not a math person, but that was some of the things that we did in order to engage them and to get them really talking about why it's useful in the real world.
Awesome. Let me do I love this, Chris. I want to actually push you further here. I want to dive into some of the suggestions you've made. Real quick, we're at the 20-minute mark. I just want to do a quick recap of what we've covered so far and say hello to anyone who've joined since we've got started. We talked first about dropping the agenda, right? Starting from a blank slate, reach your students, right? What worked before, what worked now? Look for something new and acknowledge that, and something we've talked about in our previous conversations together. The second is, an example, I guess, of that before we move on is use your environment to make the classroom come to life. So something that Chris Williams here, our guest from NYT, was talking about was bringing the classroom to his kitchen to explain a concept through cooking, which he's mentioned a couple of times. I want to hear more. I want to hear some more details there for sure. And then also about leading by example, right? And what we're talking about is Chris uses a motto: enable the heart. Encourage the heart, enable the mind. Right? We've talked about this when we talk about growth mindset, but it's hard for you. It's hard for your students. Acknowledge that. And what we want to talk about here is how to make this all practical. How do we take practical steps to really make students understand why we're doing something a certain way, and show the value within it. And it's not just that though, right? Maybe Chris, I can bring this back to you, because yes, we want to make it practical, and we got to find a way to get the students to say or acknowledge, oh, I kind of get what we're doing now, instead of kind of blindly following directions like they might have in person. How do we get them to that next level? What are some of the things that we can do here?
Sorry.
Yeah, back to you, Chris.
So I'm sorry. I'm trying to piece together some of the things that you were saying.
I guess where I'm leaving is, like, you've given us some specifics on the English example about having students feel like they're in the Canterbury Tales. Something I've heard from some teachers is ways for students to tie into things that they're doing today. I've heard some teachers encourage their students to make TikTok videos of some of the topics they're covering. They may not be the best content, right? But it's a way to engage your students and relate what they're doing to maybe things that they're doing on their own time anyway. Cooking, I think, is another great example. I want to hear more specifics, right? Like, I always want to push for more practical things that our students can do, particularly around this concept of encouraging them to connect what they're doing to practical topics. Right?
Okay. I'm sorry. One of the other things that I've done with or a couple of things that I've done with my students, just to make sure that they're not only seeing me, they're getting something physical, is I know during this time, my high school students, I would at least acknowledge their birthdays. sometimes I would just send out a birthday card to them at home normally. Now I made it important to send out a birthday card that has something that we spoke about in class. And that just goes back to knowing who the students were and something that they were interested in. It not only engages the students who are there, but also those students who kind of fell off. You know, remember, Mr. Williams' class is on a specific day, specific time. There's just something about having that physical card as opposed to the e-cards. It it lets them know that I was at least thinking about them and encouraging that connection. I know it sounds more touchy feely than anything else, but at this time with that digital disconnect and I'm not able to see them every day, they need to know that I'm there. And it's hard for teachers to say that, you know, I can't talk to my kids, I can't pull them aside and say, you know, listen, you need to kind of do this with this content, or you need to say something else. So how do you kind of get those written words out to them, especially to those who have completely fallen off for one reason or the other? Those students who haven't been able to get in contact with me or go online or don't have the resources to go online, that's one of the methods that I use in order to say, do you need something from me? Is there something that I can do in order to get you back into the classroom? If you're not able to connect with me through digital content, maybe we can mail each other stuff. We can go back and forth through packets. It's okay. My printer has ink. I'm able to do that. I have to talk about the environment, but you know, we can work that way. But how do you get them back, even with, you know, some of my college students? How do we get you engaged, and where is it that you are that I can meet you, so that not physically but, you know, mentally, that I can meet you so that we can get back into the content that we're working on.
Yeah, Chris, Chris Murner, I'd love if you could actually chime in here. You chatted something I thought is a pretty good picture of what you're dealing with personally.
Well, just like many of you and my colleagues here, we have kids at home, right? And I mean, I've been working for a long time from home, but not with five other people in my household all the time, fighting for bandwidth and all of those things. But I've seen a lot of time management and self management and task management pop up here. And I think, you know, we talked a little bit about adult education, trying to get their buy in there, but I think, you know, even for my college student, she's a junior, actually going to be an educator herself, and she's been managing her time and, you know, getting to student teaching and doing her job and all those other things. It's still very different now than it was 6 weeks ago, right? She's in a new environment. She's back home for the longest that she's been since after her freshman year. She's trying to juggle Zoom meetings, which weren't at the same time as her classes. She's got work to do and finals to prepare for. And you know, her younger brother and younger sister, who are in high school and middle school respectively, are also now in charge of their learning in a way that they haven't been. I saw a couple of people say that emails that go to students also get BCC'd to the parents. That is not the case in our district. So I get reports from Google Classroom on how they're doing, and occasionally a note from a teacher. We're proficiency based up here, so occasionally I'll get a note saying, you know, your son is meeting, he's proficient. You know, I still don't know really what that means, except that he's doing what he's supposed to do. And so I think as parents and, you know, and as students, it's a struggle for all of us to balance our time and check in ways that are meaningful to keep engagement at the forefront, while also being sure that they're taking care of themselves emotionally and mentally with their relationships with their peers. And we would do well to do the same, right? I think, you know, we've talked to a lot of educators over the last 6 weeks ago who are really struggling with not being able to turn the laptop off and the email off, and who worry about their students 24/7, which you do all of the time. But I think when you're commuting and going to a physical building, it's a little different than when you have access to them only this way. But also, you know, you're hoping that you hear from that student that you couldn't get in touch with, or you're, you know, you're kind of refreshing frequently, hoping that that student engages. And I think I love the idea of sending something tangible and sending something real to a student. You know, my youngest, who's 13, has all of a sudden become a fan of having stamps and sending things to her friends, which I think is really cool. It's old school pen pal, right? And I think being able to encourage that for your students, being able to encourage that for your kids, and frankly, all of us, you know, I think is something that it's more of an emotional tie when you can't get eyes on someone, that you're sending something that you've really thought about them longer than just firing off an email or a text, right? It's more, I don't know, it's old school, but it definitely says a little more from the heart. And you know,
Yeah.
I love that encourage the mind while supporting the heart. I know I got that wrong, but
It's
we
enabling the mind, encouraging the heart to enable
Encourage
the
the
mind.
heart, enable the mind.
Right. I
No,
know, which was our parallel, right? We've been talking about, you know, Maslow over Bloom, right? We get so, you know, so attached to standards and state competencies. And my goodness, I work for a test prep company. We love our little bubbles and our exams. But man, if a student can't attend to learning because they just don't feel safe or they don't feel supported, then it's all for naught, right? So, so I just love that.
It's you know, I have a second grader at home, a different kind of challenge, right? But his teacher recently sent out a video just saying that she missed the class and that she missed them, and I caught him watching this video several times and just, you know, feeling that much more connected. And then of course we have, if possible, you know, our accountability partner is our principal, well, the digital version of her at least. And she has a message where she's like, I'm watching you, I'm going to make sure to check in. And that's enough to really keep them going from time to time. And of course, this is for the younger children, but just being able to see even the assignments that his fellow classmates have done has, you know, allowed him to understand, oh, I'm not alone in this, right? This is a chance for me to, in some cases, compete, in some cases say, whoa, they did a really great job, and then be able to kind of move forward. So I want to take this opportunity, because you did mention Chris Murner talking about, what about the ones who haven't gone back to you? And I'm hearing that in the chat. I saw from someone said it, that students have, hey, you know, other responsibilities at home, other issues that they may be dealing with. And so maybe we can pivot a little bit. So I think we've got some strategies, you know, make things, you know, don't worry so much about the rubric, or, you know, really think about what are the core things that you want to get across. Find ways to tie back to your practical environment, find ways and activities to make it have a connection or have students understand why they're doing it. And then maybe dive into some of the fun, right? It can be a card, it can be a video, it can be something that goes a little bit extra, something that really just shows students that, hey, my teacher's out there really making an effort, and that will make a world of difference. But now, you know, I wanted to make sure at this halfway point, really try as much as we can to dive into, you know, something, you know, the Albert Einstein quote is a great example of that. Like, what do we do now with those students who have completely dropped off? You know, so maybe there's, you know, anyone can jump in here and start to kind of get the ball rolling.
I'm really interested to hear. I was going to say, I really want to hear your take on this, because I know we talked about it a little bit in our pre-game. But one of the things I think I just want to encourage folks is to not give up, right? Like, one of the biggest things in education is that students want to be seen, even if they're shy. They want to know that you see them and you know them. And that's all of these chats and the side, right? Like saying, you know, we have high school students that are working to support their families. That means you know that. That means that you see that. Like, celebrate that where you can, and give them some slack where you can. You know, work with them to the best of your ability to help this. I mean, the more that they know that you're in it with them, the more successful we'll all be. You know, people want to be anonymous, they think, and what they really want is to be seen and supported in a way that meets them where they're comfortable engaging.
I agree, Chris. And I wanted to add that we have a lot of things that we're asking of students, especially now. They're home. A lot of them know what's going on. They understand it. They understand why. The younger students might not as much, but the older, pretty much more. What I've seen with some of my students is that I apologize for that. the the students, some of them have lost a lot of some of their family members uh, because of what's going of COVID-19, and how do you help them with that? We want to reach out and we want to be able to support them in any way. And you don't want to focus on the content because you know that it's still there and it's still important, just as they would if they were in your classroom. But also you want to be able to have a separate space where they're able to express what it is that they're going through and they're doing, and make sure that they're connected with people who can help them a little bit further than you can. I'm a scientist. I'm not really the best. um, I'm not a social worker or somebody else who has more professional experience in that, but I want to be able to make sure that I can connect them with somebody who can help them. So not only having them deal with my content, but having them deal with the world around them and giving them facts and ways in order to feel empowered in their own situation and in their own space, because now the space is no longer home, it's now home and school, not home school. So how do they separate, how do I separate, and how do your parents separate, so that we can all come together and kind of figure out what it is, or your parents, guardians, siblings, how can we all come together to kind of get those things I'm sorry, I'm also seeing the chat, get those things dealt with so that the students can actually come back to you. Or how can you engage with them so that they can solve those problems that they're going through?
Chris, I'm thinking of your story earlier of the taking them into your kitchen, and you had to be the first to be vulnerable, to open up. And so the balance that it seems that we have to strike is like, let them into your kitchen, but not into the bathroom, or something like, and we're on the,
Exactly.
and I'm seeing the chats of like, I'm on so much and we're all kind of burned out in certain ways. How do we balance the amount of vulnerability, the amount of opening up to have that invites people in? How do we balance similarly sort of like optimism and realism, or acknowledging the terrible things that are happening right now and our own failures and our own glitches and all those things, and at the same time have hope and have optimism that is the powerful, and that seems to me to be the core of resilience. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's actually the hard part, because what spaces do you share and how much do you go? And again, that goes to your teaching style. How far there's the professional line of how far you should go, and you don't want to become intrusive, but you want to be able to allow the students to understand that you're a human being. There's no S on my chest, there's no cape on my back. I'm here with you. I'm just as vulnerable, but there's also, I'm still Mr. Williams, and there's still a certain level of accountability that I have for them. And there's a certain level of expectations that I have for them. And that doesn't go away because I can't see you, or I can't be in your presence. I still have those expectations regardless. And you have to meet them. That's just
Right.
me. There's no.
It's like you're churning. I mean, even as we're all being bounced around, you're still churning the legs.
You're still
forward.
churning away,
Yeah,
but you're
still moving forward.
You're making that connection a little bit deeper, but not too much, because there's that gray area of being, I don't want to say inappropriate, but there's that professional line that you still have to maintain.
Right.
But Chris, I've done this a couple times with you now, and I do know there is one strategy that you love making sure everyone hears. Is this time to? What is the button we press when the time comes that we don't always think about, right?
there's a couple that I use, but the biggest one for me are parents and guardians. I always go back to my parents and guardians and start talking with them. We've had discussions where it's just parents only. I tell them, put your kids someplace else and let us talk about what it is that I can do in order to help you solve the problems. And if I can't solve it, again, there's no S on my chest, there's no cape on my back, but we will find a way in order to help you. Making sure parents are empowered and guardians are empowered in order to help their students with whatever they're doing. I don't know. I think that's my biggest one that I always go to. When I
Yeah.
was in the classroom, I would reach out to local places where people would go. I would reach out to churches, and I would reach out to other places where I knew that people would be, and say, "Hey, Mr. Williams' test is on Wednesday. Make sure you because I knew somebody was going to hear it. If it wasn't the parents, it was going to be a cousin, or it was going to be a guardian or somebody that was going to hear it. I still kind of do that now. I just reach out to their digital platforms and make sure that they know that I have something coming up soon. But the parents and guardians are the place that I go to in order to make sure that students are engaged and that they have a level of comfort that they can engage them in dinner conversations, in conversations about content, in conversations about whatever.
Yeah. That reminds me of the article you sent, Chris. I don't know, maybe folks will have a chance to read it afterwards, but one of the things that article mentions is kind of bringing in the community. And I don't want to put more on your plate or burden you with even more activities that you have to accomplish as a teacher. We've already seen in the chat folks mentioning the same challenges that Chris Murner talked about with having their kids at home and having to work through that, but also find a way to continue to keep reaching out. So, the suggestions, a couple of things that come to mind are, one thing in the article is actually raising the stakes. It was an interesting way of framing it. And I don't think it didn't mean making a test or making something, more challenging for the students, but rather finding a way to make their work more public potentially, right? Or just by having more eyes on it to kind of give the student a sense of kind of pride in terms of the work that they've done. That could be one way to kind of look at it. And that could tie nicely with different ways to submit your work. In other words, it doesn't always have to be completing a assessment or completing a traditional test. There could be other ways that a student could display their knowledge through some of the mediums, such as submitting a video or submitting themselves, following a recipe and describing why a key ingredient works the way it does, kind of going along that same cooking thought. But I guess I want to keep kind of bubbling up different ideas that our educators here on the call could potentially use here to push forward.
Yeah, I think to me, one of the things that we keep coming back to in these sessions is do what online does best and leverage what it does maybe even better than the in-person classroom. Chances are good that all of you went to college maybe somewhere distant from where you are now, or you've traveled, or you have relatives that are located elsewhere. That might make a great pop-in person for your classroom. That might make a cool guest presenter. I know there's lots of professionals that are more than willing to pop into a Zoom room with a bunch of kids and encourage them in their cool career, or a little guest lecture that wouldn't necessarily be possible during the regular school day when people are working 9 to 5 and not located in the same area. And I think some of those sort of leverage what you have to work with to make it different and interesting, and encourage maybe those fringe participants. If you know somebody that really has one of your students really wants to be an astronaut one day, maybe you can't find an astronaut, but maybe you can find somebody who teaches in that curriculum at your local college, or somebody that you can find that has that interest, that has done something cool, or you can kind of work around the barriers that you have in terms of physical connection and make an electronic connection that wouldn't necessarily be feasible the rest of the time.
Oh, that's great, Chris. I'm thinking of one of the key points I'd make, Dennis, around raising the stakes is you can't raise the stakes on everything. You can't raise the stakes on every single day, then that's more overwhelm, right? The article talks about, well, it's the one capstone thing. It's Juneteenth. That was always a capstone, but now we're going to make it an even bigger thing. And that means a lot of the smaller stuff goes away. And Chris Murner, I'm thinking of how you referenced students who, we may be more disconnected and harder to reach now. Maybe for each of those around that capstone, around that thing that we've raised the stakes, what is the reach out that can be particular for them to find a way to tap in? And it might not be that they can be there virtually, they can be there through the technology, but they could perhaps write something or draw something or whatever it is that one thing, maybe it's an individual through that one mentor we can find or something to bring a connection in.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because some of the tools that I've used with the online world, because it's just there's so much. There are places like Common Sense Media, which is a nice place that has warehouses of material that you can look into that's based on different grade levels that's vetted through a system. I've used Flipgrid a lot just to tell stories. I saw that in the chat, and my students, when they had to do posters or had to do presentations of their experiments, I would use that when I was in the classroom, but now even more so, we can analyze everybody's experiment, or we can analyze everybody's design, and we can really come up with good conversations. And I've seen conversations and the level of detail in those conversations increase just because they can get a chance to think about it as they've seen it. We've used the pbs.org, which is a great resource for a lot of good content that you could talk about science, you can talk about art, you can have virtual tours of different places and really have that tour and really talk about it with the students, and then have them talk about it, because they don't always want to hear me, they want to hear each other. So those are nice ways in order to bring in some of the things that, sorry, talk about home.
You're good.
That thing that people are doing. So you can do that, or you can use music. I've used music a lot in some of the content. Sorry.
Your bread's ready. That's what it is.
Yes, my bread is ready.
It's the S on your chest. It's the bat phone. It
couldn't have come any other time. So those are the things that I've used. I've used music. I've used a lot of the virtual tours. We've had Streamable U, which is another open resource where we can have college tours of students, because I still want them to keep focused on where they wanted to go when we had class. Some students wanted to go to college, some wanted to do other things, but I wanted to make sure that they had a visual of where it is that they would like to go. And I didn't want to exclude those tours that they could have had. So we do a lot of virtual college tours, maybe once a week. And I try to do things that are not going to burden them. I don't want to add to all of the other classes that they have, because they have a lot of things that they have to do. They have to do music, they have to do art, they have to do math. And, as much as I think science should be the center of all worlds, they have other things that they have to study, but they have to be able to experience a lot of different resources that we can bring to them, keeping in mind that there might be limitations to their digital world.
Yeah, I thought you said something really interesting that I want to highlight, which is they don't want to hear me, they want to hear each other. And I think that really ties back nicely to some of the other things we've talked about. I'll also throw this out there. Like, have you ever been in a situation where you submit a survey or an assignment and it just goes into the ether and you never see it again? It kind of reduces the value of the work you've done into either filling it out, sharing your ideas. If there's a way you can easily and creatively share that back with the students, that can also be a way to continue to get that kind of response back. It could be as simple as responding to chats during class. It could be a word cloud that you make out of a survey response. There are a lot of sites that do that very easily. It could be highlighting specific things you've seen in other students' work that will remind them that they're not alone. This is something that everyone's going through, and this is the kind of work that people are putting. And then I also, on that note, also want to kind of encourage folks in the chat to say, respond to the question that Chris put out, specifically for nursing faculty, but what are some things you've been doing to address or manage student stress around working in this stressful time? Chris?
Right.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, so many nursing students are already working parents to begin with. And I saw it whip by earlier in the chat about how hospitals are asking them to work more hours, or their regular jobs are asking them to work more hours because they're not, quote, in school anymore, which is wildly unfair, right? But I get that too. And, I love that Trish here has just responded to all panelists, but what she said is, I teach in a community college and I made a special effort to use Blackboard Collaborate to let them ask questions and so they could see each other. I acknowledged the stress that I was experiencing, and some students reached out in a personal email, which is really nice that you put one together about how to handle stress. I think, the check-in at clinical conference, I think more than any other time, these nursing students need to lean on you as nurse educators and your previous experience and your sort of seasoned nature, that to look to you to see how to model their behavior, both clinically and in the classroom. So stressful, and nursing students have so much on their plates as it is, that I'm really glad that you guys have been able to weigh in a little bit here. I've had them on my heart. I worked with our nursing program for over 10 years here at Kaplan, and I just think, as you're going to college already now, knowing that this is kind of the new things that they're facing, this has got to be extra stressful for them. So I know that sort of that check-in, that how are you doing at the beginning of a session, that kind of space to be honest and anonymous where it's possible. You can set up a poll where you don't necessarily surface the results, but you can kind of get it in a private chat, or you can get it sort of in a backdoor way, is pretty important at this time. So that's just fantastic to see.
I've been thinking of, Chris, you talked about Chris Williams, you talked about using parents and so forth. And it's been in the back of my mind for the last 20 minutes. What's the equivalent for our nursing students? What's the equivalent for, in some cases it will be parents and so forth that nursing students may be living with now, but for our older and more adult learners, what's the equivalent? And it struck me, Chris Murner, as you're talking, and actually everybody, as you're talking about, hey, they want to hear from each other. My wife went to nursing school, and she has a group that they call the Imprudents. They still stay in touch because, you have to learn about being what would a prudent nurse do? And so she and her band of merry friends called themselves the Imprudents, and they got through nursing school together and stay in touch. And they bonded under some pretty difficult circumstances that had happened at their school. And I think that trial by fire actually welded them together. Maybe we need to be more explicit about creating, hey, it's a buddy system now. I'm gonna match you, or hey, find a partner, find a buddy, and here's maybe a couple of ideas to get you started about reaching out to each other. It's you don't go out swimming in the deep ocean without the buddy. We're all in the deep ocean now. And maybe there's some who don't have buddies. Maybe we can use other students. And this wouldn't be something I would ask a third grader or a fifth grader to do. But I would ask a college student or a graduate student to reach out to some of my more disconnected students who haven't been engaged. Maybe if they hear from another student in the class, or maybe recent alums, recent students who were in my class last year. I'm just trying to connect up a couple of things here. I'm like, oh wait, I think actually we can connect some of these ideas together this way.
I like it, kind of like we're on a school trip, and it's your job to keep, look at the person next to you, look at left and right, make sure that they're there at all times. Okay, with a few minutes to go, I just want to do a quick brief wrap up. We will also be writing, Chris Myrna will be putting some quick takeaways as part of this week's blog post. So she will attach it to the recording as well. So we will make sure you have that. But just a few takeaways from the last kind of 20 minutes is, listen, this is tough for all of us. And it's important to acknowledge that. We've talked about that the last time we met, but it's a message that we continue to need to hear and make sure that we are vulnerable first so that our students can be as well. But find ways to connect, either via short videos, send a card, sing happy birthday, can be music, a virtual tour, could be other creative ways that we'd love to hear more from you. Please email us at liveonlinesupport@kaplan.com. And then focusing on the core concept you want to get across tied to the student's work environment. Like the last piece would be, we're hearing a lot about check-ins, a lot about making sure you're leaving room for them, whether it's, Chris Ryan, I think that's an excellent point. Maybe it's a buddy check-in, or maybe it's a group check-in, making time for that, making time to allow for this check-in to take place, and maybe even including the parents, as Chris Williams mentioned earlier in our conversation. With that being said, with a few minutes left, I'd love to hear your parting or final thoughts on this topic. We'll continue to want to engage. We'll continue to want to think about how we can support. I think there were some really great takeaways from this that we'll share out via writing or via the recording. But who would like to, anyone, Chris Myrna, would you like to kick us off with our final thoughts here?
Sure. I just, again, just persist at trying to get in front of all of your students, right? The best way that you can. Help them know that you see them, that you think about them, that you want them to be successful, whatever path they're choosing and whatever level you teach at. Encouraging them to take the next step, I think, and trying to kind of keep the growth mindset view of like, we're not there yet, and this is not the path that any of us kind of chose, but we're here now, and we're going to do the best that we can together. So I love this, and I love hearing from you guys. I look forward to putting this together and seeing you guys again soon.
That's right.
I just wanted to, Chris Williams, thank you for joining us. And I'm totally picturing your kitchen and how that then opened up. So that's one of the big things that I'm going to take away, is how you found that door to open, and that led to other doors opening up with your students. That's really great and inspiring.
Thank you, Chris and Chris. This has been great, and the thing that I really would like, I guess my takeaway would be, don't be afraid to do something or try something a little differently. We all understand, and I've said it a couple of times, but there isn't a S on your chest and a cape on your back. Try not to do this alone. Find, like Chris Ryan was saying, a buddy, even as teachers. Find a buddy, somebody who you can bounce ideas off of, and support each other. Just like Chris Ryan, you said your wife was a nurse. My wife is also a nurse, and they have their support systems, and they're working with each other in order to make sure that they get through a lot of the stuff that they're going through as well. So yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, final word. I love that. And thank you for joining, Chris. We'd love to have you back soon, even though this is getting crazy and crazy from each time. But self-care, right? Support each other, watch out for each other. Be careful of not overwhelming. Think about the balance that you're setting for yourself and for your students. There's always so much we can do. But at the end of the day, we have to look out for each other and really focus on the core of what we want to get across. And then, as Chris Williams said, be creative. Try something new. Don't be afraid to fail. We'll be here to support. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Until next time, this is Dennis and the Chris's signing off.